It's the Metro on WDET. I'm Robin Vincent. If you're a leader in Detroit, your attention is trained on a big task: attract more people to the city. That's for good reason. With more people comes more tax revenue. With more revenue, Detroit can provide better social services. Think quicker DDOT buses, more paved roads, additional streetlights. But the city is running into a problem when it comes to increasing its population: high property taxes. Because property taxes are capped until a property is sold, home buyers in Detroit neighborhoods that have become more desirable bear the burden of potentially very high taxes. As an example, hundreds of homes will see their taxes climb above $10,000. That's according to an Outlier Media estimate of the city's 2026 tax roll. So, what does it mean when the system rewards staying still and punishes moving in? What does that do to a city trying to grow? Kevin Bain is the Chief Financial Officer for Public Sector Consultants and a former debt manager for the city of Detroit. Kevin, welcome to the Metro.
Thank you for having me. I'm happy to be here.
So let's think about this for a minute. Two neighbors, same street. One bought their house 30 years ago. One just bought theirs last month.
Mm-hmm.
They could be paying very different property taxes, sometimes several times what their neighbor pays.
Mm-hmm.
How did Michigan end up with a system that works like that?
Yeah, it's interesting. So 30 years ago, we were actually in a situation in which property taxes were a real issue for people in the state of Michigan across the state. And values were growing quickly, and so your property tax bills every year were growing really quickly. And it became unsustainable. It was threatening that people would have a hard time staying in their homes. And so we designed a new structure, which was called Proposal A, that made sure that your tax bill did not increase more than the rate of inflation in any year. So it capped your tax bill increase at something like 1 or 2%. And how that happened was by capping your taxable value. So even if your market value of your home grew a lot in a year, which translates to your assessed value, we capped your taxable value so that you wouldn't have these increases. It protected people, right? It protected people from huge tax bill increases that might force them out of their homes. And that was a great accomplishment. It really protects homeowners.
But
Yes.
there is a but here. I mean, was there not a lot of foresight in creating Proposal A and passing it?
Yeah, well, it was 30 years ago, and so Proposal A is showing its age now.
Go on.
There's a real issue. So by protecting people from having big tax increases, what we also did was two things. We constrained the amount of revenues that governments were collecting. And that's okay in 1 or 2 years, right? So let's say that the market value of the city went up 10% in a year, but we said we're not increasing tax bills by more than 2%. So in that year, our revenues are only growing 2% rather than 10%. And that's okay for a couple years, but over time, what we've done is we have properties that have been held for a long time continuing to pay very, very low tax bills, and the government is not collecting the appropriate amount of revenues from those property owners. That means that new buyers have to pay a lot more to effectively make up that difference so that the government is collecting enough revenues to provide the services.
So again, this system is essentially rewarding people for sitting still, and it's in some ways punishing growth and movement.
Mm-hmm.
So once people purchase homes that have seen their assessed value jump, they get this new tax hike kicked in. And that's hitting people in places like Indian Village and Corktown and Midtown, where the assessed value of homes have increased a lot over the last decade. I'm wondering what other neighborhoods are impacted by the capping of property taxes until a home is sold.
Yeah, well, we see it in those neighborhoods because they are very high value homes. But what you're not seeing is what could be happening in other neighborhoods if we didn't have this system. And so an example is East Village, where there are new homes coming up. They're 2 to 3 bedroom homes. They're brand new. They are not the same type of houses that we see in Indian Village, right? They're reasonable. They're starter homes. But the cost of building a home is expensive. They cost $400,000. So that's expensive to begin with. So we're already saying, okay, that's pretty unaffordable for a big swath of our population. The tax bills on those homes are going to be $13,000, right?
Wow.
And that's because it's a new home at this very high tax rate. So we're seeing the uncapping in places like Corktown, Indian Village. What we're not seeing are new homes in other neighborhoods because the tax bills would be so unaffordable.
So essentially, this is really slowing growth. I mean, this is one of the reasons why Mayor Mary Sheffield is saying property taxes need to be cut by, 60%?
Yeah.
Because how are you going to grow a city and make homes like the ones you're talking about in East Village appealing to folks when they look at what their taxes are going to be? I mean, I realize it's hard to get an exact number on this, but how much is the capping of property taxes, do you think, actually preventing people from moving to Detroit? Or I should say dissuading them?
Yeah, well, actually, we have quantified it. So,
of course you have.
Because of Prop A and the taxable cap that it has, our tax rates could be 40% lower if we did not have Prop A. So we could actually reduce property taxes and collect the same amount of revenue with a 40% lower property tax. I mean, that would be truly transformative and get us a far ways to the goal of Mayor Sheffield's 60%.
So in your eyes, as someone who breathes and eats and sleeps taxes, this would be a pivotal shift for the city and for the growth of Detroit. But this is not just an issue in Detroit. I mean, how much are you hearing about the issue of capping of property taxes in other places around Michigan?
Yeah, it's actually one of the biggest issues. And it's different than just property tax rates in general. Detroit and Southeast Michigan have very high property tax rates. You go over to the west side of state, Grand Rapids, their property tax rates are already half of Detroit's. So they are doing much better in terms of their property tax rates. But even there, the uncapping is referenced as their largest property tax issue. And we've done stakeholder engagement across the state, and we've heard the same thing. And I'll give you a very good reason. It's kind of easy to relate to. Empty nesters, people who have, couples who have raised their families, their kids have moved out, they have extra bedrooms that they don't need, they don't want to take care of it, they want to downsize, right? But they've been in that home since they've been raising their family. So their tax bills have stayed very, very low. Now what happens if they want to move and downsize, which is a natural thing to do?
It's cost prohibitive. Why would they do that, is what you're saying?
Why would they do that? They have a hard time selling their home because whoever wants to buy it is going to have a much higher tax bill. So that actually decreases the value of their home. Meanwhile, even if they're successful in selling their home for a good price, the next home they're moving into, which will be smaller, is going to have a higher tax bill. So they're actually going to be spending more money to go into a smaller home. And it makes it so that why would they move? They sit on their homes. There's less transactions in the market. There's less supply. Now new families, young people, how are they going to buy a home? Because the people sitting on their homes don't want to sell. Property taxes are going to be very high if they do find a willing seller. And they go to a new home, property taxes are probably going to be even higher.
I'm thinking about the broader effects of this from more of like a sociological standpoint. So this means that a lot of neighborhoods are then going to be lacking in diversity, at least from like a generational standpoint. You're talking about a lot of neighborhoods with folks who have been in their homes for a long time, which is great, but you're saying that this is not leaving a lot of room for new homeowners, for a diversity of homeowners to come into that neighborhood.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we all know that there's an affordability crisis, particularly in the housing space. Young people are buying homes later and less often, they're more likely to be renters, which you have less control over your space and you have
Truth.
less control over price increases, right? Once you buy a home, your mortgage is set. And because of Proposal A, again, your property tax bills are protected. So you have more stability. And that's more difficult to do under our current system.
I have to mention the other side of the coin on this, of course, which is that in some ways, is this a good problem to be having, let's say, in Detroit? I mean, city property values are increasing and they're increasing fast. That means city neighborhoods are becoming more desirable, no?
Yeah, well, exactly. I mean, growth is a good thing, and increases in your property value is a good thing. It means that we feel like we have better services, that we are more beautified, that we're safer. It's a nicer place to live. Those are all great things. What we don't want is now a barrier to continued growth, and we know that property taxes is one of those barriers.
It's the Metro on WDET. I'm Robin Vincent. My guest is Kevin Bain. He's the Chief Financial Officer of Public Sector Consultants. We're discussing why an old rule in Michigan capping property taxes until a property is sold is preventing population growth in Detroit. You worked for the city of Detroit as a debt manager. When people get property tax bills in the tens of thousands of dollars, they must be angry. I mean, how often does that happen where people are contesting these bills? And how much are they able to reduce their property tax bills?
Yeah, it's really confusing, right? I mean, when you buy a home or you buy any sort of property, what you get is what they're currently paying in property taxes. Now, it's very easy to think, okay, well, if I buy it for this amount and I apply the property tax rate, this is how much I'm going to be paying. But people aren't doing that math. I mean, they're just not encouraged to. They see the tax bill and then that's what they think they're going to pay. And then it uncaps and they get something like, you said, magnitudes higher.
I bet you knew your taxes like down to the penny when you bought a
Oh,
home.
absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, it's worrisome, right? I mean, I bought a 1-bedroom condo when I moved back to the city of Detroit, and I was protected under one of the NEZs, and I have very low property taxes.
Explain an NEZ.
A neighborhood improvement zone. It's a tax abatement for residential properties. So it makes it so that in new homes or newly renovated homes, you're rewarded for doing that renovation by having a lower property tax bill. So my property taxes were very low, but then I lost the abatement because it expired. And it went up actually less than I worried it would, but it did go up by about 5 or 10 times.
So it sounds like we need more of those abatements as well.
Yeah, well, some people say so, right? We have relied on abatements in the city of Detroit for a long time. And abatements are really great. They're really helpful, but they are Band-Aids to the system.
That's exactly the word I was thinking. This is just a Band-Aid to a much more broken, bigger wound.
Yeah. And
to mix metaphors here.
And it's selective, right? Yeah. Abatements are selective. You're choosing who to get the property tax cut to, right? Rather than fixing the system so that everyone enjoys fairer property taxes.
So it's an equity issue as well. Have you seen people who purchased property try to immediately sell their property because their tax bills were too high and they couldn't afford to pay them?
Yeah, I think it certainly happens, right? I mean, if you're expecting, think about how you do your monthly mortgage payment. Most people escrow their taxes, which means that their bank actually collects your 1/12 of your annual taxes as part of your mortgage, right? And so if you think that's going to be $1,000 when you move in, now it's $13,000. Your monthly payment just went up $1,000.
Impossible for some.
And if you weren't planning on that, that is going to eat up a huge percent of your income, especially in the city of Detroit.
Okay, so we have laid out some big problems here when it comes to property taxes. There's not much the city can do to limit taxes from rising on homes after that home changed hands.
Yes.
But changing Proposal A, now that would require a constitutional amendment. So what can the city do to limit tax hikes on recent home buyers in Detroit?
Well, we need to think about structural tax reform, and we are, right? Mayor Sheffield and her administration are looking for their own solutions to property tax reform. As you said, Proposal A requires a constitutional amendment, which is not impossible, although it is difficult. But there are other solutions that require a lower threshold, which would be a state legislation. So we still need to go to the state legislature and get statewide approval from legislators, not a vote of the people. Things like that could include a revamp of the land value tax that Mayor Duggan had proposed that would shift property taxes from homes and buildings onto empty land or vacant buildings. We could consider an entertainment tax on stadiums. We can consider a local option sales tax. We do have options. Really, most of the options do require that state legislation, though.
Okay, I mean, there is a ticket tax that's being considered in the city of Detroit, and a land value tax that would tax land based on its value, as the name indicates. Yep. How much revenue can these tax proposals raise for the city?
They're not huge. You'd probably have to stack them. So a ticket tax, it does depend on how well the sports teams are doing, right?
Our poor Pistons, they were doing so good
hopefully
last
they
night.
turn around.
And then, yes, they lost.
And Tigers have a lot of games, so it depends on how the Tigers are doing every year. Hopefully we got a good one ahead of us.
Lots of fingers crossed here, yes.
But that could raise something between $30 to $50 million, depending on the performance of the teams, as well as how much we tax on them. So $30 to $50 million, if it was explicitly used to lower property taxes, would be able to lower them somewhere like between 10 and 15%. So not insignificant.
Sure, this is something. It's more than a drop in the bucket. But again, the real issue here is the appetite in Lansing.
Mm-hmm.
What is the appetite in Lansing like right now for the things we've been talking about?
Well, it's always been difficult, right? I mean, it's been 30 years since any property tax reform has actually passed. And Proposal A itself was, I think, the 14th constitutional question on a ballot before it passed. So every time we try to do this, it is very difficult. That being said, people are talking about it, right? For a long time, Detroiters were the only ones really complaining about property taxes. Now the speaker has a proposal. The Democrat Detroit caucus are working on proposals. The governor's office is working on proposals. So I think there is appetite. It's in the conversation. What we need to hope for and work towards is that we use this energy for an actual solution and not either another Band-Aid or something that, like Proposal A, sounds good right now, but actually creates continued distortion and issues in the market.
So it sounds to me like for a long time, there may have been like some sort of disconnect when it came to property taxes and the fact that Michigan needs to grow, Detroit needs to grow. And now you're saying there is more of a rising consciousness that one pathway to do that has to be with property taxes and changing the system that we currently are in.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think we're very focused on growth in this state, right? I mean, we're really struggling in that aspect. And growth means that you have more people, more vibrancy, a better place to live, and more tax revenues to increase services. And people will choose to live. I mean, I think people think, are property taxes really that important to every individual? Are people thinking about that? But it does impact every single person, even if they're a renter. And it impacts them additionally because it dictates how much revenue their governments have to provide them services. And so it's all a cost-benefit analysis. Even if you're not actually doing that math in your head, I know most people aren't.
CBAs are where it's at. Cost benefit analysis for everything you do in life.
Yes, everyone do it. Everyone think rationally. But if you are paying taxes and you are not getting the services you want, you're going to consider moving. That's just how it is. If you are paying low taxes and getting not a lot of services, maybe you're okay with that. If you're paying high taxes and getting a lot of services, then maybe you're okay with that. I mean, that's the benefit of cities, right? People move to cities. They do pay higher taxes than if they were out in a rural area, but they have transportation, they have police and fire, they have parks and amenities.
I get to pass you on the street and say hello and feel connected to my neighbors.
Yeah, exactly. And so we pay more for those services. And if we are not getting those services, then we're going to recognize that, hey, I'm paying a lot here, and what am I getting? Then that's when you consider moving, either out of the city or to another state. Or if you're living in a suburb and you see, hey, the city's doing really well, and if I'm looking at a house and it looks good and I can afford it, I'll move in.
Kevin Bain, Chief Financial Officer of Public Sector Consultants. Thanks for joining me on the Metro and making a conversation that could be so dull about property taxes interesting.
Thank you for having me. This was a blast.
It's the Metro on WDET. I'm Robin Vincent. Coming up, it takes a domestic violence survivor an average of 7 tries to leave for good. Jojo Dries knows why. We'll hear from the survivor turned advocate about what happens in those attempts and what finally works. That's next on the Metro. Stay with us.